Fair enough.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Harold Evans. I'm with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. The process for today's hearing will be that I will call 10 speakers. I will ask them to be seated in the very front row. At that point, I will hand our cards to our official, Steve Russo, who is our Deputy Commissioner and General Counsel for the Department of Environmental Conservation. He will call each individual up by name. You will be given 3 minutes to speak, as indicated by the timer. When your time is up, if you have continued to speak, I will give you a warning with a small bell. If you need to come back in, please let one of the ushers know. I will ask that you limit your applause to comments. We'd like to get as many speakers in as possible today. We have over 100 people signed up to speak at 3 minutes per. You can do the math. The more people we can get in as quickly as possible, the more people will have an opportunity to speak. The restrooms are directly through the door to my left, and then make a left. And at this time, we'll start the hearing.
Is the mic on? Yeah, is the mic on? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen Russo, and as Mr. Evans just said, I'm a Deputy Commissioner and General Counsel at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and I will be presiding over today's legislative hearing. This hearing is to receive public comment on the revised draft supplemental generic EIS, the proposed high-volume hydraulic fracturing regulations, and the proposed state pollution discharge elimination system general permit. At this time, I declare this hearing open. This administrative hearing is held pursuant to Title VI of the official compilation of Codes, Rules, and Regulations of the State of New York, Part 621. The DEC is going to accept oral comments here this afternoon as well as this evening. We will also be receiving written comments. I'm here to announce today that the comment period, which was to expire on December 12th, a little less than 2 weeks from now, that Commissioner Martens has agreed to extend that comment period through and including January 11th, 2012. Well, it's good that we were able to give you a little bit of good news today. There's, as you know, there's been a huge outpouring of comments on this. We're getting close to 10,000 written comments, as well as four widely attended hearings. So we think that this extension is appropriate. The mailing address for submission of comments is available on the tables outside of the hearing, as well as on the website. And I do want to stress that equal weight is given to oral and written comments. So if for some reason you do not get a chance to speak here in the afternoon or in the evening, that you should submit written comments, that they truly are reviewed and responded to in the same way that an oral comment would be at this hearing. As he stated, the purpose of this hearing is to hear and receive statements from the public relating to the draft SGEIS, the proposed regulations, and the proposed Speedies general permit. It is not a question and answer session, and no questions will be answered on the record here this afternoon. The comments received here will form part of the official administrative record for the review of the regulations, the permit, and the SGEIS, and will be responded to in writing at a later time. I think we've already exhausted a number of cards. We're already over 100 cards, but anybody who wishes to speak must fill out a card. And if you filled out a card, you have to get this back to a DEC staff member so that it can come up to me at the appropriate time in the queue. So if you do have if you're holding on to a card, you shouldn't be. You should give it in at the table in the back. We are going to allow elected officials to speak first. And then citizens will be called in the order that we received the cards, or actually that the cards were given out and numbered. As Mr. Evans said, your name will be called when it's your turn to speak, and we have limited it to 3 minutes, and given the number of people we have, I'm going to strictly enforce that 3-minute time limit. So I please ask you to keep your comments down to 3 minutes. When I call your name, if I mispronounce it, I apologize in advance. After your name is called, please come forward and speak at that microphone. Begin with your name and address, and if you're speaking on behalf of someone or a broader group, please identify that. Now, when you make your statement, we have a court reporter sitting to my right here, so please, and he's writing down everything you say, so please speak slowly, clearly, and into the microphone. If we cannot hear you, your statement is not going to be recorded accurately. And I do finally want to emphasize that this is an official government proceeding, and I request that everyone be quiet and courteous for every speaker, regardless of whether you agree with what that person is saying or not. It takes a lot to come up here and make a statement in front of everybody, and I request that you give all speakers the same courtesy and respect that you would want yourself if you were up here speaking. Please also do no calling out or applauding in the middle of people's discussions, the hooting and hollering. What you're going to see is I'm going to raise my hand, and the timer is going to stop. It's just going to cost us time, and we're not going to be able to hear from as many people. If you want to politely applaud afterwards, that's fine as we're getting the next speaker, but please keep it to a minimum, and booing is never acceptable. So before we begin, I'd like to ask everybody to please turn off or silence your cell phones, and we're going to start with the first speaker. I'm going to call to the microphone Senator Tony Avella.
It is. Thank you. I have a few general comments in the 3 minutes that we all have to speak. I have submitted written testimony which goes through all the issues that should be addressed in the environmental impact statement. But I'm happy to hear the announcement that the public hearing comment period has been extended. I'm not sure if it's been extended to the full 180 days that myself and 30 other senators and assembly members asked that it be extended to. And does that also mean that there'll be additional public hearings? Because in addition to the 4, we asked for 10 throughout the entire state. So that's part of my testimony. Do you know, there's an old expression that those people who fail to learn from the mistakes of the past are doomed to repeat them. For generations, we poisoned the air, we poisoned the water, we poisoned the earth. And yet here we are today considering regulations to allow something that will seriously contaminate the water supply of New York State. I personally don't believe that the regulations that DEC has come up with can possibly prevent even one accident from occurring. I'm the author of Senate Bill 4220, which would ban hydrofracking in New York State. I personally believe that some of the regulations, the proposed regulations you have, obviously do not go far enough. But even if you were to strengthen them, there is no possible regulation strong enough that you could come up with to prevent that one accident. And DEC certainly doesn't have the staff, nor will ever have the staff, to possibly investigate and monitor every single well that the oil and natural gas industry is talking about. I'm here to say that the regulations don't go far enough, they can't possibly go far enough, and New York State should never consider this practice, given the fact that the industry will never release, and the regulations also give the industry the option of not releasing, if it's proprietary information, what the chemicals are in this process. I see I have 32 seconds left. Let me just say that I hope that every issue that is brought up today by my fellow colleagues in elective office and every citizen is reviewed, and we'd like to see a written report on every single issue that has been raised today. And my final comment is, although I have a good relationship with the agency, and I think you do a good job overall, I'm disappointed not to see the commissioner here. I think the commissioner should personally be at every single public hearing.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Liz Krueger.
Thank you. I'm State Senator Liz Krueger. I represent Midtown and the east side of Manhattan. Everybody shouldn't clap, remember what was asked of us. I'm also here today to testify against going forward with hydrofracturing in New York State at this point. I am a co-sponsor with my colleague Tony Avella of his ban bill. I carry my own bill to require carcinogenic materials not be used in the banning process, and I'm particularly concerned that the process, if it were to go forward, has to make full transparency of any and all chemicals, not just to DEC, but to the public. I am submitting formal testimony. I'm also submitting today the testimony of approximately 20 other people who could not be at this hearing. I fear that one hearing in New York City is not long enough. I am also glad that the commissioner has chosen to extend the time period for people to submit, but frankly, the science and the facts are what must drive this decision. To quote Governor Cuomo, let's get the facts. Let the science and the facts make the determination, not emotion, not politics. And the science and the facts are clear. New York State should not at this time move forward with allowing any permits for any wells. That gas will be there, and someday the industry might figure out how to get it out safely, but we don't have that system in place today, and so New York State should not risk our environment, our water, our air, in any county of the state of New York at this point in time. I'm not going to go through the list of the examples of the dangers. They have been so well documented through press, through academic reports, through even scientific reports buried by our own federal EPA. Which is extremely disturbing for us in the government to learn that we, like the industry, can have studies and then choose to bury them when they don't appear to give the answers we were hoping they would. The economic assessment report for the draft SGEIS is one of the issues that disturbs me most. I do not accept the findings of that report. There are economists who will be testifying and submitting testimony as to the true costs versus benefits if we were to move forward. Today, even today, as I'm here at this hearing, there are more reports coming out about the concerns about earthquakes caused by hydraulic fracturing, seismic activity of all sizes, underground, above ground. When DEC was commissioned to do your research, nobody even imagined an earthquake issue with hydraulic fracturing. I don't believe the state of New York could go forward until we completed our own detailed assessment of additional new risks we are learning from the system. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bill Perkins, but again, I remind you, please hold your applause till the end of the speaker.
They want me. Good afternoon. I'm State Senator Bill Perkins. I represent the 30th Senatorial District, which includes Harlem, the Upper West Side, Morningside Heights, and Washington Heights. And to you and the others, I have a written testimony that I've left outside, which is more extensive. However, the prospect of hydrofracking remains controversial. Serious questions, concerns about the inadequacy of the Supplemental General Impact Statement, also known as SGEIS, still exist. With respect to my particular district, one worries whether the city's aging water infrastructure will be protected by the 1,000-foot buffer zone proposed by the SGEIS. To what degree will century-old tunnels and aqueducts be compromised by the pressure caused by hydrofracking? What will happen when the city is no longer able to prove to the EPA that it can protect our water system? If the EPA orders the city to build a filtration plant, where will an estimated $20 billion come from? Besides increased water rates, what other woes await which poses the city's poorest residents, some of whom are my constituents? Can citizens endure yet more cuts to vital services they depend on to live? Police and fire protection, healthcare, transportation, sewage, schools. What's next to be further defunded in order to enrich energy companies? Although the SGEIS proposes restrictions on hydrofracking in New York City, it does not propose to do so in many other places in the state. This alarming oversight ignores how what occurs in one part of the state affects us all. The negative impact of air pollution or water contamination upstate won't remain there. Permeable and fluid air and water can travel for thousands of miles. Even when they don't, polluted air and contaminated water contaminate produce and livestock grown upstate and subsequently sold downstate. The DEC should take its cue from the EPA. Devote more time and research to this crucial matter. Until you do, and we have the complete picture of what hydrofracking in New York State will truly look like, I will continue to oppose it. And let me say on behalf of the children of the Harlems, not only that I represent, but throughout the state, who suffer severe asthma and other respiratory problems, it is clear that this hydrofracking will do nothing but aggravate that situation. So again, we're very concerned that this not move forward at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Tom Duane.
Thank you very much for providing this opportunity to testify. I represent the 29th District, and I have more than 300,000 residents and an incredible number of businesses that depend on clean and safe water. And fracking is maybe the most widely discussed issue among my constituents, and it's in strong opposition. People are very familiar with how dangerous this is. You know, I voiced my dismay in letter form, but I have to say I remain dismayed, which is sort of a mild word, but dismayed, that this is hasty. I still think this is hasty. You really have to decelerate the process to ensure the absolute fairest and most exhaustive review, because the more we learn, the more we know that fracking would be terrible for our state. Okay, a permanent prohibition on fracking in and around New York City and the Syracuse watersheds, and a limited prohibition on fracking in and around primary aquifers and state-owned land and other water supplies around the state. So, well, this suggests that the agency understands, because of the Pennsylvania experience, that we need to protect our water sources. It also serves to make it so that it's almost like you're purposely creating a division in New York State between upstate, downstate, suburban, and that cannot be, because we all need clean and safe drinking water. Okay, the buffer around New York City and the Syracuse watershed, 4,000 feet. That can be exceeded by the horizontal displacement caused by fracking. You must take that into account, and the proposed buffers for other sources of drinking water, including primary aquifers for other communities, it's even smaller, and that is incredibly dangerous. I'm going to try to... Wastewater treatment, already overburdened throughout the state. In order to ensure that you could deal with the wastewater, we'd have to make an enormous capital investment. And yes, allegedly the industry would do it, but they can walk away also. They can just walk away, and then we're stuck with that in perpetuity in New York State.
Thank you, Senator.
I just want to wrap up. I also strongly believe that there should be criminal penalties on the table.
Senator, I really have to ask you to sum up.
Both for intentional frac fluid releases and for acts of negligence. We need to have criminal penalties, and that to deter reckless behavior. But best of all, there would be no fracking behavior in New York. Let's de-accelerate this process. Let's save the state from fracking.
Thank you, Senator.
I would just like to
Assemblyman
ask that-
Richard Gottfried, please.
I would like to ask that if you have written comments, please leave them in the box at the edge of the stage. It will help our stenographer later on record those
They
comments.
said they all submitted them. Assemblyman Gottfried.
Thank you. My name is Richard Gottfried, and I chair the Health Committee in the New York State Assembly. I will be filing with you copies of my written testimony, which details a variety of issues. Earlier this year, the Assembly Health Committee and the Environmental Conservation Committee held a public hearing on the health consequences of fracking. And the scientific testimony at that hearing made it very clear that this is not something that New York should tolerate. We must not allow the oil and gas industry to turn thousands of square miles of New York State into the next Love Canal. You know, all over the world, major senseless industrial policies and practices have wrecked life and health in vast areas and even whole nations. We must not allow that to happen in New York. In Pennsylvania and Wyoming and elsewhere, they have allowed the oil and gas industry to do that kind of damage to their states. We must not allow that to happen in our state. We must not buy into the corporate junk science that is trying to convince us to allow a practice that threatens to jeopardize the life and health and economy of not only thousands of square miles of New York, but millions of New Yorkers for generations to come. That is not what we want for our state. We must not allow hydrofracking to go forward in New York. Thank you.
Assemblyman, if you could drop off your comments in the box, thank you. Thank you. Assemblymember Jim Brennan.
Good afternoon. I'll be submitting written testimony after at some point. Yeah. I wanted to just say in general that I think the state should abandon its entire effort to allow fracking in New York, state agency, and so let me address a number of defects that I believe are in the EIS because the law requires the agency to take a hard look at all of the different factors involved. So I want to address what I consider to be a series of very significant defects, which ultimately I don't think can be addressed because I think the level of damage is unmitigatable in relation to fracking. The failure to analyze the cumulative impact of thousands of wells being drilled and fracked is a major defect. The EIS has a medium development scenario of 1,600 wells a year. I cannot imagine the impact over 20 years of more than 32,000 wells getting drilled and repeatedly fracked throughout the state. Every well has a lifespan of approximately 20 years, and for the well to be fracked 3 to 7 times a year involving millions and millions of gallons of contaminated wastewater and toxic water with each fracking, the notion that that is mitigatable in some way makes no sense at all, but there's no analysis even available. The Commissioner, Martens, has admitted that there are no publicly available treatment facilities in New York for the toxic wastewater, and so if there's no real plan for the treatment and disposal of the wastewater, there doesn't seem to be any possible notion of going forward without one. The buffers for protection of sensitive water systems are totally inadequate. The notion of a 1,000-foot buffer between the infrastructure of the New York City watershed and drilling, with the horizontal drills extending out 3,000 feet under current technology, creates unprecedented levels of danger for the New York City watershed, and even the Bloomberg administration is seeking a 7-mile buffer at this time, and is hiring a geological firm to determine whether or not even that 7-mile buffer is adequate, and the DEC needs to take note of that. The idea that large sections of rural New York would have thousands of wells drilled and fracked, with the oil and gas industry investing that level of activity, means the industrialization of now pristine rural areas of the state, and
Assemblyman, I need you to sum up.
and creates levels of contamination that are simply unacceptable. So for these reasons, and many more, which you will hear throughout the rest of the day and evening, the state should not go forward with the plan.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Assemblymember Daniel O'Donnell. Not here? All right. Not here. How about Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal? I see her.
Thank you. Hello, Commissioner.
Hello.
Nice to see you. Okay, I'm Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal. I represent the Upper West Side, parts of Clinton, Hell's Kitchen, the 67th Assembly District, and I'm delighted to be here today so I can express my opposition to any fracking in New York State. We cannot and we must not ignore the experiences of other states that have allowed fracking to move forward. Towns that have been fracked are mere shells of their former selves. In the small Pennsylvania town of Dimmock, children and their parents are reporting mysterious illnesses, including stomach pains, lethargy, and other more serious symptoms. Those same families are reporting their pets are aborting litters and delivering stillborn or severely disabled litters. Talk about a canary in a coal mine. The livestock, the animals are dying suddenly and without cause. The air and the water smell like rotten eggs or worse, human excrement, and it goes without saying that the water is undrinkable. Charities have begun fundraising to provide these besieged townspeople with clean, potable drinking water. Toxins, hydrocarbons, and volatile organic compounds from trucks carrying fracking waste and leaks in the chemical ponds holding this toxic fluid are contaminating groundwater, the soil, and the air. And unsuspecting homeowners are being lured into signing natural gas leases by oftentimes false promises of big payouts by deep-pocketed drilling companies. Why do we want this in New York State when we see what havoc it has wreaked in Pennsylvania? I don't think we want it. Accidents, when they happen, are usually serious, and the impacts are long and hard felt. One need only look to the Chesapeake Energy well blowout, which took place on the 1-year anniversary of the BP oil spill, for confirmation. The blowout, believed to be caused by a crack in the top of the well, spewed gallons and gallons of toxic fluid into the waters in northern Pennsylvania. Now, all of this sounds like the stuff of nightmares, but it is what will be imposing on New York State if we approve fracking. That is why I am seriously, deadly opposed to fracking, as are most of my constituents. I had a town hall meeting with hundreds upon hundreds of people, and they were almost 2-1 opposed to fracking because of the damage it will do for future generations, for our land, for our earth, for our people, for our air, for our soil. I will be submitting longer testimony, but I just want to say that this is a bad idea whose time has not come. Hopefully its time will not come in our lifetime. Thank you very much.
Assemblymember, can you put your comments in the box? Linda? Can you Thank you. City Council Member Gail Brewer. City Councilman Jim Gener.
Thank you. My name is New York City Councilman Jim Gener. I'm chair of the Committee on Environmental Protection for the New York City Council. I'm also a geologist working on this issue for a long time, and I too had a hearing on September 22nd at the City Council. We heard about 7 hours worth of testimony. I've held many hearings on this, and like most of the hearings that I've had on this, even though the DEC was invited, the DEC chose not to testify, not to come, not to even send an intern to hear what the people of the City of New York and people that I brought in from all around the country had to say at that hearing, and I think that that is most regrettable. And I have several studies in my hands. This should be a science-based process. Sadly, I fear that it is not. I think the science that is being brought to the table is not being brought to the table by the people who should be doing it. That is DEC, and DEC is spending its time rebutting the science that is brought forth by others. In particular, I make reference to the 2009 study by the city DEP that was done by a consultant. That was from 2009. The state spent a lot of money to rebut this in a study that I hold here in my hands that I put out in early 2011. And as I said, it is a sad state of affairs when the state is spending its money to rebut the good science that has been brought forth by others. DEP, you'll hear testimony from them. They're doing more science in an attempt to further convince the state of what needs to be done, and in terms of exploring all of what is not known regarding microseismic activity, which DEC wishes very much to dismiss, but it is very real. And not only is DEP doing their study, but I hold in my hands a study released this month that was done in the UK, a study that's ongoing by the Oklahoma Geological Survey and by the USGS, who has testified before my committee. And had you been there on the 22nd of September, you would have heard this. They're very, very concerned about what it means for New York City's water tunnels with regard to microseismic activity. Many, many more issues that I could talk about. Only 6 seconds left, but I reject as a geologist, the study that was put out by the state this year, which rebutted DEP science, and I will continue to bring science forward in the hope that it finally will be taken seriously by DEC.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity to testify.
Please, Councilman, if you can leave your comments in the box. Thank you. Next is Shelby Garner, speaking on behalf of Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. Ms. Garner here? Mr. Garner? Oh, I'm sorry. Shelby's a guy. Sorry about that. I apologize.
I would like to thank the State Department of Environmental Conservation for allowing me to present testimony today. While I am pleased that the state has moved to protect the New York City watershed and other areas from the natural gas extraction process commonly referred to as fracking, I believe that the Department of Environmental Conservation should not be rushing to approve this method of gas extraction in any of New York State. There is still much we do not understand about the impact of fracking on the environment, but what we do know suggests that the risks far outweigh the benefits. 98% of the fluid used to create the fissures is water. However, the balance of the fracking fluid is a collection of highly poisonous chemicals, a deadly cocktail whose contents is considered proprietary and therefore not reviewable by regulators or disclosed to the public. Just last week, on November 23rd, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency partially granted a petition under the Toxic Substances Control Act to obtain data on chemical substances and mixtures used in hydraulic fracturing. It would make sense for the state to wait until this process is completed and more data is available regarding the health and safety impacts of fracking. This announcement follows the EPA's decision in October that it would develop standards for treatment of fracking wastewater discharges. What we already know about fracking suggests that when it goes wrong, the impacts are significant and lasting. Fracking requires millions of gallons of water. The water is contaminated by the toxic chemicals required by the fracking process, and once used, the fracking fluid becomes wastewater that needs to be contained. Currently, there is no process mandated for the containment, storage, or treatment of this fluid. Elsewhere in the country, poor management of this wastewater has resulted in the contamination of private wells and municipal drinking water. Generally, wastewater is transported to treatment plants, and the EPA has determined that many of these treatment plants are not properly equipped to deal with this type of wastewater. 2 weeks ago, an EPA study determined that an aquifer in Pavilion, Wyoming, the site of significant fracking activity, contains several cancer-causing compounds and at least one chemical that is commonly used in fracking fluids. We need to protect our aquifers from this toxic fluid. I understand that appropriate regulation of the fracking process and disposal of the wastewater would be labor-intensive and would require the hiring of hundreds of new inspectors at DEC, which would impose a heavy burden on taxpayers unless the industry is required to pay for these new hires. Proponents argue that natural gas burns cleaner than other commercially viable fossil fuels. However, the environmental benefits are illusory because of the toxicity of the fracking process. Fracking creates fissures in rock and drives methane gas to the surface. The goal of fracking is to capture the methane, but some of it inevitably finds its own path and bubbles up to the surface, where it is released into the air or into local streams and water sources. Methane is not only a potential contaminant in drinking water, it is also 12 to 25% more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. This is not the clean alternative to oil as is being billed. I note that while the watershed would be protected, the tunnels that bring water to New York City would run through the unprotected areas, and there is concern that there is not a wide enough buffer to protect the tunnels. New York State proposes a site-specific review for drilling within 1,000 feet of the tunnel. That is not sufficient. There should be an absolute bar on drilling within the buffer, and 1,000 feet is woefully inadequate.
Right,
Environmentalists.
Are you summing up? Okay. You get to sum up.
Finally, the economic benefits of fracking are illusory. While the extraction companies stand to book huge profits, the benefits to New Yorkers are exaggerated. We should not wait for an upstate well to start exploding as one did in Pennsylvania before saying, don't place New Yorkers at risk.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to call up our first group of speakers. Some of you are already seated in the front row. I would ask, after you've spoken, to please return to another seat so that we can vacate this row for the next group of speakers. At this point, if you hear your name called, please either sit in the front row or the group right next to it. Ida Sanoff, Josh Fox, Arthur Kremer, Clark Rhodes, Louise Johnson, Catherine Skopik, Ann Basson, Bonnie Weber, Stephanie Renza, Paul Rush, Eric Goldstein, Dave, I believe it's P-U-B-L-O-W. Thank you. Elizabeth Riddell.
No, they just called me now.
Okay. Ida Sanoff.
I'm speaking on behalf of Assembly Member William Colton, 47th Assembly District, Kings County. New York State is home to some of the largest pristine bodies of water in the nation and around the world. We have been blessed with an abundant resource which is crucial to sustaining life on this planet. We should cherish and protect it at all costs. I understand that the state is looking at the development of the Marcellus Shale as an economic boost that would add revenues in times of perennial deficits. However, we cannot trade short-term economic gain for what could amount to the irreparable damage of our potable water supply. What the industry fails to tell the public is that a majority of the jobs produced from high-volume hydraulic fracking operations will be filled by workers from outside of New York State. When operations cease, the workers will move back to their home state, leaving New York's southern tier in another economic vacuum. In addition, most of the companies that own our shale gas reserves are foreign-based corporations. Some of these companies are leading the charge to export U.S.-produced natural gas. We have already seen flourishing local businesses in New York State insist that they will leave the state if hydrofracking moves forward. Omegang Brewery in Cooperstown, New York, home of the Baseball Hall of Fame, recently filed a legal brief in support of the local ban passed in Middlefield, stating that about 50% of the land that borders Omegang's acreage is leased to drilling companies, and the potential for contamination would devastate their fresh water supply and force them to move. The industry continues to deceive the public by stating in commercials that natural gas can supply America with 100 years of low-cost clean energy. What they are not telling you is that America already has plenty of natural gas, enough to serve domestic needs, and that while the Marcellus Shale contains 500 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, only 10% is recoverable. At current national consumption rates, that equates to only about 2 years' worth of natural gas in the U.S. And that's only if the gas is actually produced for domestic consumption. There are indications that much of the gas produced via hydrofracking is destined for export. We have discovered that ticking time bombs called liquefied natural gas terminals have been proposed for the waters near our coastline. These huge facilities are not for the importation of LNG, but for the exportation of LNG to Europe and other markets that will pay more for the gas. Liquefied natural gas is a highly flammable, explosive product, and the huge quantities passing through offshore LNG terminals will be tempting targets for terrorists. An accident to one of these facilities can have devastating consequences for the millions of people who live along our shoreline. I think I can say on behalf of Assemblyman Colton that fracking is bad for upstate, downstate, and New York State.